A dirty and exhausted dog emerged from the bushes and begged a camper for help. When he saw what the animal was hiding, he was shaken to the core. Jake Henderson eased his camper van into a secluded clearing beside Greenleaf Lake, hoping for a quiet weekend away from the city's relentless demands. He had planned this camping trip for months, longing to escape endless work calls and the dull glow of office lights. The early evening sky burned with streaks of orange and lavender, while the lake's waters shimmered under the fading sun. Pine trees towered around him, tall silhouettes that rustled gently in the breeze. This small oasis, he told himself, would be the perfect place to clear his head and reconnect with nature. He set up his modest campsite quickly, a single tent beside the van, a foldable chair, and a small grill. Once finished, he pulled out a map to consider the best hiking trails for the next day. As he scanned the lines winding around the lake, a distant cry echoed through the still air. It was not the caw of a bird or the whimper of any common woodland animal. He paused, listening carefully. Again, that low, plaintive sound reached his ears, a bark almost sorrowful in tone. Intrigued and faintly concerned, Jake placed the map on the driver's seat and took a few steps toward the lake's edge. In the dimming light, movement on the far side of the water captured his attention. At first he thought it was a deer foraging near the undergrowth, but as he focused, he realized it was a dog, a golden retriever, alone and seemingly agitated. The animal paced along the shoreline, barking intermittently as though searching for something. Every so often it stopped to stare across the lake directly at Jake's campground. Even at a distance, he sensed the dog was in distress. Jake's mind raced through possibilities. Could the dog have been abandoned? Was its owner lost or injured? He tried waving, calling out in a calm voice, "Hey buddy, are you okay?" The retriever raised its head, ears alert, but stayed where it was. Night was closing in, the sun's last rays dissolving behind the pines. A stronger wind rippled the lake's surface, and a hush settled among the trees. Something in the dog's posture tugged at Jake's heart. He grabbed a flashlight and started walking along the shoreline, heading toward a narrow footpath that led around the water. The trail was muddy in places, dotted with roots and stones that threatened to trip him. As he made his way, small woodland creatures rustled in the bushes. He spotted the occasional rabbit darting away from the flashlight's beam, yet he kept his focus on that golden shape in the distance. Every few minutes he called out softly, hoping the dog might come running. Instead, the retriever waited, pacing in circles, then took off deeper into the forest. Jake felt a surge of concern. He knew venturing too far in the dark could be risky, especially in unfamiliar territory. Yet something about the dog's urgency gnawed at him. Perhaps it was his own childhood memories of finding a stray puppy in a ditch, an experience that had stayed with him for years. Back then he had been powerless, just a kid who watched helplessly until his parents arrived to help. Now, older and more confident, he refused to walk away from an animal in need. He pressed on, following the narrow path around the lake. Moonlight began to guide him, reflected on the water's surface in silver streaks. 20 minutes later, the barking grew louder. Jake switched off his flashlight to see better in the moonlit clearing just ahead. The dog stood at the edge of a cluster of mossy boulders, panting heavily. Its coat was tangled with burrs, and from its posture, head low, tail wagging in brief, nervous sweeps, Jake sensed it was begging for him to follow. "Hey, it's okay," Jake murmured, stepping closer, palms facing outward to show he posed no threat. The retriever whined softly, glancing back toward the forest. Up close, the dog's ribs were faintly visible beneath its golden fur, suggesting it had been on its own for days, yet its eyes shone with a resolute glimmer. He could almost read the silent plea, "Come with me. Help." The dog turned and padded deeper into the forest, pausing every few yards to see if Jake followed. He took a deep breath, steeling himself. He was out here without phone reception, the night quickly thickening around him, but he could not turn back. The dog's desperation was undeniable. Keeping a safe distance, both for his own caution and to not frighten the dog, Jake ventured into the denser trees. Branches creaked in the wind, and the scent of damp earth filled his lungs. Every so often, Jake nearly lost sight of the retriever when it darted beyond a cluster of tree trunks. Yet the dog would always reappear, encouraging him forward with a bark or a pleading look. The journey felt surreal, as if he had stepped into a hidden world guided only by a devoted canine's faith. After 10 more minutes, they reached a small clearing illuminated by pale moonlight. At the far side of this space, the forest floor descended into a steep ravine. Jake noticed a battered tent pitched precariously near the slope's edge. Torn fabric flapped in the breeze, and scattered supplies lay half buried in dried leaves. Something was definitely wrong. Cautiously, he approached the campsite. The golden retriever trotted ahead and stopped beside a figure sprawled on the ground. Jake's pulse quickened. A middle-aged man lay unconscious, his hiking boots muddy, and a nasty gash on his temple glistened in the faint light. Without hesitation, Jake knelt to check the man's pulse, relieved to find it beating steadily. The man's breathing, though shallow, suggested he was still clinging to life. "Hey, can you hear me?" Jake asked, tapping the man's shoulder. When there was no response, he unzipped the man's coat to loosen any constriction, then inspected the wound. It was crusted with dried blood, indicating it might have happened hours ago. Meanwhile, the retriever hovered close, whining, as if asking Jake to fix this immediately. Jake rummaged through the scattered supplies, praying for a first aid kit. Beneath a toppled camping stool, he found a half-open box containing bandages, gauze, and antiseptic. Quickly, he cleaned and dressed the man's wound as best he could, all the while mentally calculating how far he was from his own van. He recalled there was a ranger station about 6 miles in the opposite direction. With no cell phone signal, his only option might be to hike there at first light and request assistance. The question was whether the injured camper could survive the night in his current state. As if answering Jake's unspoken fears, the man's eyelids fluttered. He let out a soft groan, then blinked in confusion. The golden retriever edged closer, pressing its muzzle to the man's shoulder. For a moment, the camper appeared disoriented, but when he noticed the dog and then Jake, tears welled in his eyes. "You found me," he rasped, voice cracking from dehydration. "My name is Dean. I was trying to set up camp when I slipped, hit my head, and the dog, she wouldn't leave me." Jake offered him some water from a dented canteen. Dean sipped gratefully, though he winced at the pain in his temple. "She's been with you all along?" Jake asked softly, glancing at the retriever whose gaze never left Dean's face. Dean nodded, wincing. "I only met her yesterday. She showed up out of nowhere, hungry and limping. Gave her some of my food. Next thing I know, she's my shadow. Then this morning I took a bad fall while gathering firewood, must have passed out. If she hadn't gone off searching for help." His voice trailed off, but his meaning was clear. This dog had saved his life. The weight of that realization pressed on Jake. Even though battered by the wilderness, the golden retriever had trekked around the lake, desperate to find anyone who might rescue her new friend. It was an astonishing act of loyalty from a dog who seemingly had no one. Carefully, Jake helped Dean sit up, resting him against a tree trunk. The dog pressed close, tail swishing in quiet relief. Jake explained his plan: to stabilize Dean through the night and set out for the ranger station at dawn. He wrapped Dean in a spare thermal blanket, offering bites of an energy bar. Though the man's eyes remained half-lidded, he seemed more alert and kept murmuring thanks to both Jake and the dog. Nightfall wrapped the forest in near total darkness. Jake gathered branches to build a small fire, mindful not to risk further accidents on the steep terrain. He propped Dean's legs on a rolled sleeping bag, trying to maintain circulation. The dog nestled at Dean's side, radiating a comforting warmth. Jake watched the pair, astonished at how naturally the retriever adopted the role of watchful guardian. Something about the animal's unwavering devotion moved him deeply. Occasionally, Dean drifted in and out of consciousness, stirring to mumble about whether they'd make it home. Each time, the dog stood up, licked his hand, and let out a soft bark, as if offering reassurance. Jake felt a lump in his throat. He had always liked animals, but never witnessed such single-minded dedication from a stray. It left him certain that come morning, he would do everything in his power to help both Dean and this extraordinary retriever. As the embers of the fire crackled, Jake found himself reflecting on life's unpredictability. He had journeyed here seeking solitude, yet ended up on an unplanned rescue mission. And it was all thanks to a dog that no one seemed to want. The quiet forest, the flickering glow, and the gentle presence of the golden retriever formed a tableau that Jake would never forget. He had a strong hunch that this was just the beginning of a story that would touch far more hearts than just his own. At dawn, the embers of the small fire glowed faintly, illuminating the makeshift campsite where Jake and Dean had spent the night. The forest, still shadowy with morning mist, stirred with signs of life. Chirping birds replaced the nighttime hush, while the sun's gentle light peeked over the treetops. Dean, having dozed off in short bursts, tried to shift himself upright. The pain in his temple flared, but a determined look crossed his face as he tried to assess his own condition. Jake crouched beside him, offering a reassuring smile and a fresh canteen of water. Nearby, the golden retriever, who had remained vigilant until dawn, stood watch, her ears alert for any sign of disturbance. The time had come to seek help, but everyone felt the significance of that quietly shared night. Jake explained his plan in a soft tone, not wanting to startle Dean or the dog. He would head back around the lake, find the ranger station, and call for an ambulance or any available rescue. Although he was anxious to begin the trek, he worried about leaving Dean behind. The man was improving, but still too weak to walk, especially over uneven forest trails. The idea of leaving him alone, even with the dog's protective presence, gnawed at Jake's conscience. Yet time was precious. If a proper medical team did not arrive soon, infection or dehydration could take their toll. Dean, wincing at every movement, encouraged Jake to go, stating that he had faith in both the dog's watchful eye and Jake's determination to bring back the cavalry. Before leaving, Jake sought out any additional supplies in Dean's scattered gear. A search revealed a spare bottle of water, a half-finished pack of trail mix, and a whistle intended for emergencies. He placed them within Dean's reach and asked if the man felt capable of using the whistle should he need to signal the dog or scare off any curious wildlife. Dean nodded, though each short dip of his head appeared to cost him a flash of pain. Meanwhile, the golden retriever paced around the site, eyes never straying far from Dean's prone figure. Her loyalty humbled Jake, who knelt to stroke her ears gently. Though a stray, she seemed to carry the calm confidence of a longtime companion devoted to protecting her new friend. Determined not to waste a moment, Jake grabbed his flashlight, tightened the laces on his boots, and ensured he had his phone, even if no signal was available this deep in the woods. He spared one last glance at Dean, who managed a crooked grin beneath the bandage on his forehead. "I'll be back as soon as I can," Jake promised. The dog padded up to him, nudging his hand as if to ask, "Are you certain you can do this alone?" He gave her a gentle pat and murmured, "Take care of him, girl." With that, he set out, guided by the rising sun. Though the route back to his campsite seemed straightforward, the memory of losing sight of the dog in the dark made him tread carefully. Sunlight filtered through the canopy, creating patches of gold across the damp earth. Each step reminded Jake of the responsibility that weighed on his conscience. He was an ordinary camper, not a trained ranger or EMT, yet he had become indispensable to a man's survival. Every rustle in the underbrush heightened his senses, making him wonder how easily misfortune struck in these wild spaces. After nearly half an hour of brisk walking, the lake's shoreline curved into view. His campsite still stood intact, the single tent bathed in the morning glow. Grabbing his keys from where he'd left them atop the cooler, he climbed into the camper van and started the engine, praying the uneven road around Greenleaf Lake would lead him quickly to the ranger station. The narrow dirt road meandered through pine groves and rocky outcrops. As the van jolted over potholes, Jake's mind raced with logistical questions. Would the ranger station be open this early? Could they mobilize a rescue team with proper medical equipment? He had no idea about the station's resources or staff numbers. He only knew they were likely the closest official presence, miles from any hospital. Occasionally, he glimpsed the shimmering lake through breaks in the trees, recalling how the golden retriever's silhouette had guided him the previous night. That dog was extraordinary, driven by unwavering loyalty for a stranger. Jake felt a wave of admiration and, unexpectedly, concern. He could not just walk away once Dean was safe. The dog deserved a home or at least proper care. Within 20 minutes, a rustic wooden sign marked the ranger station entrance. Jake pulled into a gravel lot, relieved to see smoke curling from a chimney and a green pickup parked out front. Inside, he found a single ranger named Marie Donner, sipping coffee while updating a logbook. Startled by his urgent tone, she listened intently as he recounted the previous night, the injured camper, and the heroic golden retriever. "We don't have a full rescue unit here," she explained, brows creased in worry. "But we do have an off-road vehicle with a medical kit. Let me radio the county authorities and see if we can get an ambulance out by the main road. You'll have to guide us back to your friend's location." Grateful, Jake nodded. While Marie radioed for additional help, Jake paced the small station, noticing posters on local wildlife and missing pets. His eyes landed on one flyer featuring a golden retriever with the caption, "Lost Dog, Answers to Maddie." The photo showed a sweet-faced, rust-colored pup who had disappeared from a nearby town weeks ago. His pulse quickened. Though the image was somewhat grainy, it bore a striking resemblance to the dog that saved Dean. The shape of the ears and the gentle expression were remarkably similar. He snapped a photo of the flyer with his phone, unsure if it was the same dog, but determined to investigate. If it was Maddie, someone out there was likely desperate to bring her home. Marie finished coordinating with local responders. "We've got an ambulance en route to the highway turnoff, but they can't drive a rig deep onto those trails. We'll have to transport your friend to them in our vehicle." She handed Jake a portable radio. "Keep this on your belt in case we get separated. It's rugged enough to handle the forest terrain." The plan formed quickly. Marie would drive the station's four-wheel truck, and Jake would guide her to the exact spot along the ravine. Time was of the essence. Climbing into the ranger's vehicle, Jake glanced again at the lost dog flyer. Anxiety pulsed through him, but so did a glimmer of hope. If that gentle retriever truly was Maddie, the day might end with more than one life saved. Backtracking along the bumpy trail proved faster with Marie's practiced driving and the truck's sturdy tires. Jake kept a watchful eye on the surroundings, recognizing familiar tree clusters and large boulders. When they finally reached a clearing near the steep slope, he felt the sting of dread. Had Dean held on? And the dog? Was she still there? They parked on level ground, and Jake jumped out, calling Dean's name. A moment later, the golden retriever came bounding from behind a log, her tail wagging in frantic relief. She raced to Jake, then whirled around, leading them straight to Dean. Slumped against the tree trunk, he still clutched the whistle in one hand. At their approach, he mustered a weak wave, eyes filled with gratitude and exhaustion. Marie and Jake moved swiftly, checking his vitals before positioning a stretcher. The dog paced anxiously, whining every time Dean winced in pain. But under Jake's comforting murmurs, she finally sat, watching the rescue unfold with the silent hope only a dog could convey. Despite the severity of his situation, Dean managed a shaky laugh when he saw the Golden so close. "She never left my side," he whispered. Within minutes, they loaded him into the truck, ready to rendezvous with the waiting ambulance. The dog hopped in too, settling next to Dean's feet, as though convinced her job was far from over. For the first time in days, Jake felt an unshakable optimism. Dean would receive proper medical attention, the determined retriever was safe, and there was a chance she might reunite with her family. As the truck rumbled back toward civilization, Jake glanced at the dog curled contentedly by Dean's side and silently thanked fate for guiding him here. Everything felt refreshingly right. A steady rumble accompanied them on the dirt road toward the highway, where the ambulance would meet Ranger Marie's truck. Jake sat in the passenger seat, turning occasionally to check on Dean, who lay across the back seat with the Golden Retriever snugly pressed against him. Though clearly exhausted, Dean mustered a small grin whenever the dog nuzzled his arm. Despite the tension and the bumpy ride, there was a strange comfort in that cramped interior. The dog's gentle presence made the space feel less like a rescue vehicle and more like a circle of trusted friends. The morning sun was climbing higher, and Jake felt his heart lighten with each passing mile. He focused on the shape of pine trees zipping by, each trunk a blur of dark brown against the brilliant green background. Marie drove expertly, avoiding deeper ruts and skirting large stones. Occasionally, she updated the ambulance crew via radio, confirming their estimated arrival time. Outside, the forest gradually opened, replaced by meadows dotted with wildflowers. The wind carried faint hints of summer heat, though the day still felt fresh. A turn in the road revealed two paramedics waiting beside an orange and white ambulance. They sprang into action as soon as Ranger Marie's truck braked to a halt. Jake and Marie climbed out, opening the rear door with purposeful haste. Dean's eyes fluttered, and he exhaled in relief. Sweat beaded his forehead, but his complexion looked better than it had the night before. The dog, however, displayed immediate alarm at the flurry of activity. When a paramedic tried to usher her aside to load Dean onto the gurney, she backed up against Dean's legs and let out a low, anxious whine. "Easy, girl," Jake soothed, stepping in. "It's all right. They're here to help him." His calm voice and gentle approach seemed to reassure her. She retreated enough for the medics to do their job, though her eyes never left Dean. The handoff proceeded quickly. By the time Jake finished signing a statement for the Ranger's incident report, the ambulance doors had closed and the team was preparing to drive Dean to the nearest hospital. The dog, clearly unwilling to leave her newfound companion, leaped onto the rear bumper just as they tried shutting it. One of the paramedics started to protest, but Dean, weak as he was, insisted the retriever come along. "She saved me," he rasped. "I'm not leaving her behind." Jake caught the paramedic's hesitant glance. Hospitals often had strict policies regarding animals, but under these circumstances, and with Dean's adamant plea, they decided to make an exception for the short ride. Jake breathed a sigh of relief as he watched the ambulance pull onto the highway, taillights receding down the sunlit stretch of asphalt. Seeing the dog's head pop into view through the rear window made him smile. If any dog deserved special treatment, it was that one. Ranger Marie offered Jake a ride back to the station. He'd have to collect his own camper later, but he welcomed a chance to sort out the swirl of questions building in his mind. At the forefront was the lost dog flyer he had seen taped to a bulletin board. If indeed the retriever was Maddie, then a woman named Janet Porter, the name printed on the flyer, might be missing her beloved pet. The phone number was local, so perhaps a simple call could reunite them. Yet Jake couldn't shake the image of Dean and the dog clinging to each other. It was as though they'd formed an unbreakable bond overnight, sealed by shared adversity. Inside the modest ranger station, Marie brewed fresh coffee while Jake dialed the number from the flyer. A monotone ringing droned on for several long moments, then a recorded message. "You've reached the Porters. Please leave your name and number." Jake frowned at the beep but left his details, briefly explaining that he might have found a golden retriever matching the posted description. When he hung up, he couldn't help a twinge of doubt. What if the owners no longer lived there or had given up searching? Alternatively, what if the dog had been missing for so long that returning to old owners, however loving, might disrupt the new bond forming with Dean? "You did the right thing," Marie commented, handing him a steaming mug. "If it's the same dog, you've got to let the owner decide, at least see if they want to reclaim her. She might have a family that's worried sick." Jake nodded, sipping the coffee. The warmth steadied him as he wrestled with competing thoughts. His eyes strayed to the station's window, beyond which the road and forest beckoned. He felt torn by a sense of duty to Dean, who was indebted to that dog's loyalty, and a moral obligation to help reunite a lost pet with its rightful home. Truthfully, he also felt an unexpected pang in his own heart. During that frantic night, he had grown attached to the retriever's unwavering spirit. Leaving her fate in someone else's hands felt strangely difficult. Not wanting to linger in indecision, Jake decided his next step was to visit Dean at the hospital. If Janet Porter called back, he would figure out the next move then. Ranger Marie offered to drive him into town, which he gladly accepted. His camper would be fine by the lake for another day. He left an official note on the station's board indicating he would return for it soon, then grabbed his belongings from the truck. As they set off, the forest gave way to suburban roads, and soon the town's outskirts emerged. Rows of small businesses and a handful of traffic lights replaced the natural hush of pines and water. The hospital was a low brick building with wide windows gleaming in midday sun. The ER parking lot overflowed, though Marie managed to find a space near an ambulance dock. Inside, they traced the hallway until a friendly receptionist led them to the correct ward. A subtle blend of antiseptic and the faint aroma of cafeteria food hung in the air, while overhead announcements reminded visitors about visiting hours. Jake's pulse quickened with each step. They found Dean resting in a semi-private room, propped up on pillows, with his injured head bandaged properly. An IV drip fed fluids into his arm. To Jake's relief, the golden retriever lay curled at the foot of Dean's bed, tail thumping softly when she saw them enter. A nurse stood beside them, scribbling notes on a clipboard, apparently unfazed by the canine presence. "Hey," Dean greeted, voice raspy but showing more strength than before. "Doc says I got a mild concussion. They're going to keep me for observation, but I should be able to leave tomorrow. If it weren't for you two and her." He paused to nod gratefully at the dog. "I'd still be in those woods or worse." Jake and Marie smiled. Jake approached the bed, hand extended, which Dean shook weakly. "I'm just glad we found you in time. It was the dog who really led me there." Dean's gaze drifted to the retriever. "I haven't got a clue where she came from," he said softly. "She just wandered into my camp. But as soon as she saw I was in trouble, she refused to leave. I owe her everything." At that, Jake mentioned the lost dog flyer. "Her name might be Maddie. Somebody posted about a golden retriever missing for weeks. I called the owner's number, but no answer yet. Just so you know, if that person calls back..." He hesitated. "I guess I'll figure out what to do, in case the owners claim her." Dean went quiet for a moment, stroking the dog's ears as she shifted closer. The thought of parting seemed to weigh on him, yet he also nodded in understanding. If she belongs to somebody who's been searching high and low, I can't stand in the way. She deserves to be wherever she's happiest. Marie observed them both, arms folded lightly. "She might already have chosen you," she teased. "Dogs have a strong sense of loyalty, and not all owners keep track of their pets the way they should. It's possible she slipped away or got lost on a hike, or it could be something else." Dean's hand paused on the dog's thick fur. "Yeah, could be." He cast a grateful glance at Jake, but behind his eyes glimmered a mix of hope and resignation. He was prepared for the possibility that someone would show up, rightful claim in hand, and take the Golden away. A nurse entered to check Dean's vitals, so Marie and Jake slipped into the hallway to give them space. The corridor was lined with chairs where visitors waited anxiously, texting or pacing. Through a window at the end of the hall, Jake caught sight of a bright day, sunbeams kissing the tops of passing cars. He realized that for now, there was little more he could do except wait for a callback. Ranger Marie glanced at her watch. Duty called, and she needed to return to Greenleaf Lake. "I'll stay around here for a bit," Jake told her. "I need to see if that phone call comes in, and I want to make sure Dean's okay before I head back to my camper." They exchanged phone numbers, promising to keep each other updated. With a final wave, Marie headed for the parking lot. Left alone, Jake drifted back into Dean's room. The nurse had finished, leaving the pair in relative peace. The dog lifted her muzzle in greeting, and Dean immediately motioned for Jake to take the seat nearest the bed. "Hard to believe I was lying in the dirt last night," Dean mused, rubbing his bandaged temple. "But I guess you've got a story or two yourself. Camping out here all alone?" Jake offered a short laugh. "Yeah, I was hoping for a quiet weekend away from work. Didn't expect to become a first responder." "It feels surreal," Dean's eyebrows furrowed, as if the memory of that precipice was still haunting him. "I'd have died if you hadn't come when you did. I'm not a reckless camper, you know. I've done plenty of hikes. But I got careless walking near that ravine." Jake found himself recalling the adrenaline rush, the darkness, the frantic search through the forest. And then the dog valiantly guiding him to Dean's side. It was an event that he, too, would never forget. Time slipped by in comfortable conversation. Nurses bustled in and out, adjusting pillows or checking monitors. The golden retriever, now dozing contently, seemed to realize she was no longer in crisis mode. Her chest rose and fell in soothing rhythm, occasionally twitching as though chasing dream rabbits. Each moment that passed made the possibility of returning her to unknown owners more complicated. Jake could see it in Dean's guarded expression. He was already attached. Then, as if conjured by the tension, Jake's phone rang. A number he didn't recognize lit the screen. He glanced at Dean, who mouthed silently, "Go ahead." Slipping into the hallway, Jake answered in a hushed tone. On the other end, a woman introduced herself as Janet Porter, voice trembling with a blend of hope and anxiety. She had gotten his message about the golden retriever. She asked a flurry of questions. Where was the dog found? Was she healthy? Did she still respond to the name Maddie? Jake listened carefully, explaining what happened by Greenleaf Lake, how the dog had rescued Dean, and how they suspected she might indeed be Maddie. He omitted no detail about the dog's condition or the extraordinary loyalty she had shown. Janet inhaled sharply at each turn in his story. When her voice came again, it was thick with tears. "That sounds exactly like my dog," she whispered. "Maddie is so sweet, always protective. She disappeared during a weekend camping trip and I searched for days. Please, where can I see her?" Jake's stomach tightened. This was the moment they'd foreseen. She seemed genuine, distraught, eager to be reunited with her beloved dog. "We're at County Hospital in the North Ward," he said. "I can meet you in the reception area. Maddie, if it's truly her, is in a patient's room right now. He's the one she saved. His name is Dean." Janet promised to come immediately, her gratitude spilling through the phone in quick, fervent words. As the call ended, Jake hovered in the hallway, wrestling with his own emotions. He walked back into Dean's room with measured steps, noticing how the dog lifted her head at his presence. "Was that her owner?" Dean asked quietly. Jake nodded, and the dog let out a little whine at the sudden hush in the room. A pang of mixed relief and sadness tightened Jake's chest. Dean exhaled slowly. "Well then, I guess we'll find out soon." He tried to force a smile, but his eyes flicked to the golden by his side, reflecting a cloud of unspoken worry. There was nothing left to do but wait. Janet Porter arrived half an hour later, stepping into the hospital corridor with anxious strides. She was in her late 30s, with short chestnut hair pulled behind her ears, and eyes that flicked over every stranger's face as if searching for a hint of her missing companion. Jake spotted her from a bench near the waiting area, where he had been pacing back and forth. Rising to greet her, he introduced himself with a polite nod. Even before he could offer more than a quiet welcome, she asked if Maddie was safe and close by. Her evident worry choked her words. He guided her through a short hallway toward Dean's room. Each step seemed to magnify her apprehension. Janet clutched a small photo between her fingers, showing a younger golden retriever frolicking in a sunlit backyard. She whispered that she had posted countless flyers, hiked the region multiple times, and nearly given up hope after a fruitless month. Her voice trembled when she spoke of regret, that maybe she should never have taken Maddie on that ill-fated camping trip. Though Jake tried to reassure her, she hardly seemed to hear. Her focus was entirely on the possibility of finding her beloved dog. Inside the room, Dean sat propped up in bed, quietly stroking the golden retriever's ears. The dog lifted her head the instant Janet approached, nose twitching as if trying to recall an old scent. Janet froze, tears pooling in her eyes, and softly called, "Maddie?" On hearing the name, the dog tilted her head, ears perked in familiar recognition. Her tail, which had been thumping gently, now wagged with a fervor that left no doubt of her excitement. Dean observed the scene, his throat constricting at the realization. The bond he had formed was real, yet the dog's rightful owner stood here. For a moment, none of them spoke. Janet fell to her knees beside the bed, tears streaming as she carefully extended a hand toward the retriever. The dog pressed her muzzle into Janet's palm, releasing a soft whine that sounded equal parts relief and lingering uncertainty. Dean forced a supportive smile, despite the pang of loss tugging at his chest. He sensed that the dog he called his savior was indeed Janet's long-lost Maddie. All at once, relief and heartbreak meshed into the same breath. Jake hovered near the doorway, his heart twisting as he witnessed that poignant reunion. Janet turned her gaze to Dean. "I can never thank you enough for watching over her," she said, voice shaking, "and for, well, letting her stay by your side. What you both went through." She paused, inhaling deeply. "It's a miracle." Dean dipped his head, voice hushed as he explained how the dog had saved his life. With a trembling laugh, he recounted her extraordinary determination in seeking help, an unwavering loyalty that overcame fear and discomfort. Janet listened intently, her fingertips absently stroking the fur along Maddie's neck, trying to comprehend the ordeal they had all endured. Eventually, Dean asked the question that weighed most heavily on his mind. "So, you'll be taking her back home with you?" His smile faltered, revealing how conflicted he felt. Janet looked from the dog to Dean, reading the sorrow and gratitude in his expression. "She is my dog," she said slowly, "and I've been searching everywhere for her, but it's clear you share a special bond now. I'm not going to force anything. If she wants to stay with you, or if you need more time, we can figure something out." Her sincerity was obvious, though her tears continued to flow. The golden retriever, Maddie, rested her head on Dean's knee, letting out a long exhale. Jake saw the man swallow hard as he leaned in to whisper something to her. A hush settled over the room, punctuated only by the rhythmic hum of the IV pump. Finally, Dean looked up, eyes brimming with conflicting emotions. "You gave me hope," he told the dog, voice trembling. "You saved me. I can't imagine a day without you, but I know you had a whole life before we met." Then he looked directly at Janet, forcing a gentle smile. "She's yours. I won't stand in the way." That declaration, spoken with such vulnerability, caused Janet's tears to fall anew. She stroked Maddie's fur in quiet relief. Yet the dog refused to move away from Dean's bedside, as if defying the finality of his words. Janet sensed it too, an unbreakable connection they had forged under dire circumstances. Swallowing hard, she knelt and pressed her cheek against Maddie's shoulder. "You know," she began, looking between Dean and Jake, "I've got a big place with a fenced yard, and if Dean wants to visit, you're always welcome. Or if you need her around while you recover." Her voice trailed off, uncertain. Dean, touched by her generosity, could only nod. Jake spoke up gently, suggesting that everyone take a few days to decide. "Maybe focus on healing, Dean. You'll be out of here soon, right? You can see how Maddie settles in with Janet, then maybe arrange visits." A weight seemed to lift in the room as they agreed on a simple plan. Janet would take Maddie home, ensuring a reunion with whatever life she had left behind. Meanwhile, Dean would continue his recovery, seeing how he felt once he was back on his feet. If the dog chose to remain close to him, they'd work it out. Before Janet departed, the hospital staff kindly allowed her to walk Maddie around the corridors so the dog could stretch her legs. Jake accompanied them, grateful for the chance to speak privately. He told Janet about the night in detail, how the Golden first appeared by the lakeside, and how she guided him through the darkness. Janet listened, eyes wide. "That's exactly the kind of dog she's always been," she whispered, brushing away a tear. "If she sees someone in trouble, she can't help but intervene." As they passed a window overlooking a courtyard, Maddie gazed up, tail wagging at the sight of open skies. Janet paused, turning to Jake with a faint smile. "Thank you for calling me. I can't imagine how painful it must be for Dean or even for you to separate from her, but I promise I'll cherish her more than ever. And if Dean wants her back, well, I'm not going to stand in the way of their friendship." Her sincerity shone through in every syllable. Jake nodded, returning her smile. "We just want what's best for Maddie," he said, "and you might be exactly that. Dean is thankful she's alive at all. If it's meant to be, they'll remain in each other's lives." By the time they returned to Dean's room, the nurse had finished checking his vitals, and Ranger Marie had stepped in to see if all was well. Maddie willingly stepped closer to Janet, letting her attach a simple leash. The moment felt solemn, like a transition in the dog's life. Dean murmured a goodbye, though the nurse reminded him that he still needed rest. As Janet led Maddie out, the retriever looked back over her shoulder, offering Dean one last longing gaze. Then they were gone, disappearing down the corridor. Silence stretched in their wake, holding a swirl of gratitude and heartache. Jake lingered outside Dean's hospital room for a few minutes after Janet left with Maddie, trying to make sense of the scene he had just witnessed. The corridor was unusually still, as if the building itself understood that something significant had transpired. Dean, exhausted from both injury and emotion, sank deeper into his pillows, eyes half open. Finally, Jake re-entered to find his friend staring blankly at the ceiling. A weary smile tugged at Dean's lips when he saw Jake, yet the atmosphere felt charged with sadness that no words could dispel. "Thanks for staying," Dean murmured. His throat sounded dry and raw, and he reached for a cup of water on the tray. "I know you didn't have to wait around. You've done more than enough already." Jake settled into the chair beside him. I wanted to see how you were doing. It can't be easy watching her go. He paused, recalling the dog's last backward glance at Dean. But hey, it isn't like she's gone forever. Janet was pretty open to visits. Maybe that's what'll happen once you get out of here. Dean gave a small nod. Yeah, it's just weird. I know it was only a couple days, but that dog and I... He struggled for a moment, searching for the right words. We went through something real out there in the woods. Hard to let go of that. Jake understood. The dog's determined loyalty had carved out a place in his own heart too, and he had spent far less time with her. He was relieved that Janet seemed kind. Perhaps there was a middle ground where Dean and Maddie could maintain their bond. Leaning back, he said, I called Ranger Marie. She offered to help coordinate if you ever want to meet for a walk with Maddie near Greenleaf Lake. Says that dog is welcome at the park any time. Dean's eyes brightened slightly. That's good, really good. Gives me something to look forward to. Besides, I have to remember I was lucky. My head's throbbing, but it could have been worse. It's not every day someone finds you in time. They both fell silent, each recalling the tension of that stormy rescue. Jake saw a muscle tighten in Dean's jaw, as though he were reliving the fall, the helplessness, and the unwavering presence of the Golden who stayed with him. Then Dean glanced at Jake, concern knitting his brow. What about your weekend getaway? This must have been the exact opposite of peaceful solitude. Jake laughed, a subdued sound. I can't complain, man, you're alive. That matters more than me roasting marshmallows by the lake. But I'll have to go back and pick up my camper, make sure nothing's missing. Maybe next time I'll choose a less eventful campsite. His attempt at humor felt forced, but Dean cracked a grin. When a nurse came in to adjust the IV, Jake decided it was time to let Dean rest. Rising from the chair, he placed a warm hand on Dean's shoulder. I'll be around for another day, maybe two, until I'm sure you're okay. Then I'll head out. I gave the hospital my contact info, so call or text if you need anything. And if you hear from Janet about Maddie... Dean finished his sentence on, I'll let you know. Count on it. Jake left the hospital in a reflective mood, stepping into the afternoon sunlight that illuminated the parking lot. His phone still showed no missed calls or messages from Janet, but he wasn't surprised. She'd only just left. Maybe after she got Maddie settled, she'd decide whether to arrange a future meeting with Dean. There was something intangible, an undercurrent of possibility that kept Jake hopeful. He had seen that dog's heart. For all her devotion, she might just find a way to give them both the companionship they needed. He retrieved his borrowed car from Ranger Marie's station. She had left the keys with the front desk clerk and a short note reminding him to drive safely on the winding forest roads. The few miles back to Greenleaf Lake were quiet. No sign of the chaos from the prior night. With the sun high and a clear sky, everything looked normal, even serene. Hikers roaming well-marked trails, fishermen casting lines at the lake's edge, families picnicking beneath the pines. His campsite appeared undisturbed, though the leftover ashes in his fire pit and the half-packed gear in his tent reminded him of how abruptly life could change. Jake wasted no time dismantling his setup. As he folded the tent, he allowed himself a final glance at the calm waters. His original plan, to clear his head, had morphed into something more profound. He realized he felt lighter, oddly at peace, despite having spent the last 24 hours in a frantic rescue mission. Something about responding to an urgent need, forging a bond with that brave animal, and helping a total stranger had brought him unexpected clarity. He drove back into town, scanning every side road for a glimpse of Janet's car or the Golden's bright fur, yet he saw no sign of either. After checking into a modest motel, just a simple room with a narrow bed, he stretched out, exhaustion sinking into his bones. Sleep tempted him, but his mind refused to rest, replaying every detail of the dog's devotion. How many people had she touched just by doing what came naturally to her? Maybe some old cynicism in him was crumbling. In this quiet space, he let himself wonder if everyday life might benefit from moments of selflessness, like the loyal warmth that Dog offered Dean at his darkest hour. The next morning, Jake awakened earlier than planned. Unable to resist, he decided to visit the hospital once more. Dean's progress had become an unexpected priority. The elevator doors slid open on the third floor, and he was surprised to see Dean shuffling cautiously in the hallway, guided by a nurse. He wore a loose hospital gown and had bandages around his head, but his eyes lit up when he spotted Jake. "Nice timing," Dean called, leaning on the nurse's arm for support. "They're making me practice walking a bit to ensure I'm not dizzy. Doctor says I might be discharged later today." Relief colored his voice, though he still moved gingerly. Jake supported him on the other side, smiling as the three of them strolled a short loop around the corridor. Through a large window at the end, the morning light cast a golden glow that reminded them both of a certain retriever's fur. When the nurse stepped away to complete her rounds, Dean lowered his voice. "Janet texted me last night. She said Maddie's fine, just a bit anxious at times, probably adjusting to being indoors again." A warmth crept into his features at the mention of the dog. She even sent a photo of Maddie curled on the couch. "Looks happy, but I can't deny I felt a pang in my gut seeing it." Jake placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Give it time. You'll see her soon, I'm sure." He believed it wholeheartedly. The last thing Janet would want was to sever this uncanny bond forged by near tragedy. Soon they might meet, perhaps on a stroll near the lake, watching Maddie bounce between them. A mental image stirred within Jake, prompting a surge of optimism. They paused at a water fountain, letting Dean catch his breath. Head injuries could make even simple tasks feel draining. "You know," Dean murmured, "when I was lying out there, drifting in and out, I had these flashes of my childhood dog. Weird stuff your brain does when you think you're on your last legs. It's like I realized how much I missed that easy devotion. And now, after what Maddie did..." He trailed off, but Jake nodded, fully understanding. "Sometimes it takes a crisis to shake us up," Jake replied. "We get so focused on day-to-day stuff that we forget the comfort a good dog can bring." He offered Dean a slight grin. "You'll figure out something. And if you ever need help, I'm just a call away." Back in Dean's room, hospital staff bustled to finalize his charts. Within the hour, the doctor confirmed Dean could be discharged that afternoon, provided he had someone to keep an eye on him for at least a few days. Jake offered to stay through the weekend, and Dean, looking touched, agreed. It meant booking extra nights at the motel, but after all that had happened, Jake felt responsible to ensure Dean truly recovered before returning to his own hectic life. By late afternoon, they were walking out of the hospital, Dean leaning on a cane borrowed from the physical therapy department. Fresh air greeted them, thick with summer warmth. Jake helped load Dean's meager belongings into the trunk of his sedan. The mild concussion still bothered Dean, but the color in his cheeks had improved dramatically since that first grim morning. Neither spoke openly of the absent Golden, yet the dog's presence seemed to hover in both their thoughts. Jake drove them to a small diner on the edge of town, figuring that Dean's first meal out of the hospital ought to be something hearty. Over plates of scrambled eggs and toasted bagels, they talked about everything but the accident. Books they'd read, music they liked, places they hoped to travel one day. The conversation had a soothing effect, as though they were longtime friends rather than two men who met by chance in a life-or-death situation. Eventually, Dean brought up Maddie again. "Janet said she might call tonight if I'm up for a visit. But maybe that's too soon. I mean, I don't want to confuse the dog or upset her routine." "Does Janet seem worried about that?" Jake asked, chasing a crumb around his plate. Dean shrugged. She said the door's open whenever I want to come by. Her parents left her that house, big yard near a creek. I guess Maddie used to go swimming there every day. His face softened at the mental image. A pretty good life for a dog, I'd say. Jake nodded thoughtfully. It might help your own healing to see her too. That bond you formed, it doesn't vanish overnight. Maybe it'll bring you closure or inspire something new. He paused, wanting to phrase his thoughts carefully. Look, if you end up adopting a dog at some point, maybe a rescue, would that help fill the gap if Maddie returns fully to Janet? Dean looked pensive. I don't know. Part of me thinks no other dog could be Maddie, but I also realize I've been alone too long. He gave a half chuckle. Never thought I'd have these feelings. Guess nearly dying changes a man. Jake gave a faint smile. We all need a friend sometimes, whether human or canine. Just don't rush it. Let your head heal first. He tapped the side of his own head with a grin, and Dean laughed softly. They finished their meal and slid back into the car. As they headed for the motel, where Jake had booked a second room for Dean, the sky turned a gentle peach color. Jake's phone buzzed at a red light displaying Janet's number. They exchanged a quick, curious glance. Dean inhaled deeply as Jake pressed answer, putting it on speaker. Janet's voice burst through in an excited tone. Hi, Jake. Could you ask Dean if he feels well enough for a short visit tonight? Maddie's been restless since we got home. She keeps going to the front door, pawing at it. I think she misses him. Dean's eyes widened, a spark returning to them. He pressed a hand to his bandage as if making sure he was all right. Tell her yes, he whispered, glancing at Jake with a hopeful grin. I can handle a short visit. Let me see if we can find her place, Jake replied into the phone. We'll do it, Janet. Text me the address and we'll head over soon. He ended the call just as the light turned green. They exchanged smiles of anticipation, neither admitting out loud how meaningful it was to rejoin Maddie so quickly. The dog had truly woven them all together into a new kind of family. The rest of the drive passed in expectant silence. Each corner they turned drew them closer to a little house at the edge of town, set behind tall oak trees, where a golden retriever waited by the door. Neither man knew what the night would bring, but both felt certain that another step in this remarkable story was about to unfold. Jake turned onto a winding side road that led them past a row of oak trees and a small wooden sign bearing the house number Janet had texted. The property sat back from the pavement, partially concealed by a stand of tall, swaying grass. As dusk settled in, a warm glow emanated from the porch light, illuminating the front steps and a simple welcome mat. Dean, perched in the passenger seat, shifted restlessly, his bandaged head faintly visible in the dim interior of the car. He did not voice his apprehension, but Jake could sense his nerves, as if each breath carried the subtle tremor of hope mixed with dread. Janet's place was a modest single-story home featuring broad windows and a wraparound porch. A thick oak stood in the front yard, its leaves rustling in the evening breeze. The scene exuded a peaceful air, yet Dean pressed his lips together as he stared at the front door. He was about to step into Maddie's world, a space where she might rediscover long-forgotten routines, a space that could overshadow the dramatic moments he had shared with her in the forest. Jake cut the engine, and they both sat in silence for a heartbeat, summoning courage. Finally, Dean reached for the door handle. A dog's bark rang out from inside, high-pitched but joyful, followed by the hurried shuffle of feet. Before Jake or Dean had reached the porch, the door swung open. Janet appeared, casual in a flannel shirt and jeans, her eyes bright with anticipation. In an instant, Maddie bounded forward, golden fur catching the soft glow from the porch lamp. Her tail whipped in wide arcs as she pranced around Dean, sniffing the unfamiliar cane, then lifting her muzzle to his free hand. The display of excitement set Dean's face alight with a tentative smile. He braced his cane against the steps and squatted carefully, ignoring the ache in his temples so he could run a hand over Maddie's head. "Welcome," Janet said, stepping aside so they could enter. "I wasn't sure if you'd feel up to traveling, Dean, but I'm so glad you came. She's been pacing near the window all afternoon." A nervous laugh escaped her. She gestured for Jake to follow them in. Inside, the house smelled of freshly brewed tea and the faint spice of cinnamon, creating an instant sense of comfort. Wooden floors gleamed under soft lighting, and a few framed photos dotted the walls, images of Maddie in earlier days, chasing a tennis ball or curled at Janet's feet. Dean sank onto a cushioned armchair with Maddie instantly plopping down beside him, her body leaning close in that protective way Jake remembered. Meanwhile, Janet hurried to the kitchen to fetch drinks, leaving them alone in a cozy living room that boasted warm lamps, a worn rug, and a modest fireplace. Jake settled on a nearby couch, resting his elbows on his knees as he watched the dog's tail swish across the floor. "How's your head?" he asked Dean, noticing the slight tension in his friend's jaw. Dean exhaled shakily. "It's better. Feels like stepping back into normal life after being stuck in survival mode. But seeing her again..." He trailed off, hugging Maddie around her neck, an undeniable wave of relief washing over him. Within moments, Janet returned with steaming mugs and a plate of homemade cookies, placing them on the coffee table. "They're oatmeal raisin," she explained, eyes darting from Dean to Jake. "Thought you might be hungry after the hospital food." Jake thanked her, picking up one of the cookies with gratitude. The sweet, comforting smell stirred a memory of childhood, and he savored the taste, realizing that the past few days had left little time for simple pleasures. Janet glanced at Dean's bandage. "If it hurts, I have extra pillows you can use," she offered gently. "I wish you could stay longer, but I know you should probably rest properly. Still, even an hour or two might help Maddie adjust." She spoke with a quiet sincerity that touched them both, her gaze frequently dipping to where Maddie leaned against Dean's leg. Jake observed the scene. The dog looked completely at home, and Janet's eyes shone with relief, yet neither person seemed certain how to proceed. The forest drama had bound them together, but real life required nuance. Taking a slow sip of tea, Jake decided to steer the conversation toward more neutral ground. "This is a lovely home," he began. "Have you lived here long?" Janet relaxed, setting her mug down. "I inherited it from my parents a few years ago. Moved in permanently after..." Her voice faltered, but she forged on. "After I got Maddie. The yard was perfect for a dog. We used to spend hours out there playing fetch by the creek. Then one day, she vanished. I was terrified she'd been stolen or hurt." At that, her hand found Maddie's collar as though to confirm the dog's presence was real. Dean stroked Maddie's ears, a fleeting sadness crossing his face. "She had quite the adventure," he said softly, recalling the battered state in which he'd first seen her. "She looked hungry and tired when she showed up, yet she still had the spirit to protect me." He fell silent, remembering the long hours in the ravine. Janet brushed the corner of her eye. "I wish I could have stopped it from happening. We were camping near the national forest boundary. It was supposed to be a fun weekend, but she got spooked by something on a night walk, tore off into the trees. I searched everywhere. Then life got busy, and Her voice cracked. "I never stopped looking, but my hope dwindled." Jake wanted to assure her that sometimes events unfold in ways no one can control. Instead, he gave a quiet nod, empathizing with her regret. "No one's fault," he murmured. "She found Dean and saved his life. Maybe that was some grand plan we can't understand." They lingered in companionable silence, sipping tea. Outside, dusk deepened into a soft indigo sky, the living room lights casting cozy shadows across the walls. With each passing minute, Dean and Maddie seemed to fall back into a gentle rhythm, as though reaffirming the bond they'd forged. At one point, Janet slipped away, returning with a small, squeaky toy shaped like a duck. She squeaked it lightly, and Maddie's ears perked up. An eager gleam lit her eyes, reminding them all that, for a moment, she was an ordinary dog delighted by simple joys. Dean chuckled, wincing slightly at the motion. "I'd chase a squeaky duck too if I could," he joked, grimacing when he touched his head. Janet placed the toy in Maddie's mouth, praising her softly. Through all the wistful longing in Dean's eyes, Jake saw acceptance. The dog was healthy, safe, and loved, and that was what truly mattered. Eventually, Janet stepped toward the kitchen, beckoning for Jake to join her. They left Dean and Maddie in the living room, the dog happily nudging her toy against Dean's good leg. In the kitchen's warm light, Janet paused by the sink, her face drawn in quiet thought. "I know he loves her," she said softly, not meeting Jake's eyes. "Maybe as much as I do, and she clearly cares for him in a special way. He was ready to die in that ravine, and she refused to let it happen. Do you think it's too selfish for me to bring her home?" Jake took a moment before answering. "I think you both just want what's best for Maddie. Dean never intended to take her from you. He's grateful she's alive. Maybe letting him visit once in a while would ease the transition for everyone." Janet nodded, her shoulders relaxing. "I'm open to that. Truly. I just don't want him to feel like I ripped her away. I also worry that she'll sense his sadness." She glanced at the small window overlooking a fenced yard, the memory of Maddie's daily routine flashing across her mind. "But this is her home too." "Yeah," Jake agreed gently, "and Dean knows it. He's still dealing with a lot, physically, emotionally. But this meeting was a good idea. Watching them together, it's helping." She exhaled, a half smile forming. "I guess that's true." Then she changed the subject, motioning toward the back door. "Feel free to step outside for air if you need. It's quiet back there. Maddie used to run the whole yard, sniffing around every corner. Maybe next time you visit you'll see her bounding in the creek." They returned to the living room, finding Dean scratching the retriever's ears while she gnawed gently on the squeaky duck. The tension in his posture had eased, replaced by a calm acceptance. He looked up when he noticed them. "I should probably head back to the motel soon," he said. "I feel a bit shaky." The glimmer in his eye suggested he was also bracing for the farewell. Janet offered a hand, helping Dean rise. Though unsteady, he managed with the cane's assistance. Maddie stood too, gazing up as if sensing this was goodbye. They made their way to the front door, with Jake following quietly, unsure if words could ease the swirl of emotions. Janet knelt beside Maddie, giving her an encouraging pat, then touched Dean's arm. "Thank you for coming. Really, I'm sure she needed to see you almost as much as you needed to see her." He dipped his head, blinking back sudden tears. "Yeah, we both needed it. And thank you for letting me be part of her life. She means a lot to me." Her nod was gentle as she stepped back. Maddie licked Dean's hand once, then watched him step onto the porch. Outside, the early night air hung still, and a chorus of crickets began their song. Jake escorted Dean to the car, shoulders tense with empathy. Neither man spoke until they were both inside. Then Jake exhaled. "You okay?" he asked softly, starting the ignition. Dean stared at the house for a long moment, focusing on the silhouette of Janet standing in the doorway, Maddie's shape beside her. "Yeah," he said, but his voice cracked on the single syllable. "I will be." The drive back to the motel passed in a hushed hush, broken only by the occasional update from the GPS. Streetlights flashed across the windshield, painting stripes of shadow on Dean's face. Each flicker reminded Jake how abruptly life can shift. Not long ago, Dean was stranded in a ravine, pinned between unconsciousness and hope. Now he was free of danger, if not entirely free of regret. Yet an undercurrent of possibility remained, swirling between the two households linked by a remarkable dog. At the motel, Jake walked Dean to his room, ensuring he took his medication and had enough water. After a brief exchange of goodnights, Jake entered his own room. He sank onto the bed, letting the events of the evening wash over him. A sense of tranquility settled in, layered with a touch of wistfulness. In a world where schedules and obligations often overshadow compassion, seeing how love could be shared, even between strangers, was a revelation. He recalled the look on Maddie's face when Dean rose to leave, that subtle, questioning tilt of her head, as though to ask, "Will I see you again soon?" Jake closed his eyes, already guessing the answer. This was not the final chapter. Even if the path ahead proved complicated, they had all come too far to simply part ways. The bond forged in crisis would echo long after these days, binding a dog, a lost camper, and a man who intended only to spend a peaceful weekend by a quiet lake. One way or another, this story had more pages left to turn. Jake woke the next morning to the distant sound of tires crunching gravel outside the motel. Pale sunlight seeped through the thin curtains, revealing specks of dust dancing above his suitcase. He stretched, blinking away the lingering traces of sleep. Another day, he thought, another chance to untangle the delicate ties that bound Dean, Janet, and the golden-hearted dog they both adored. After dressing in worn jeans and a plain shirt, he stepped into the hallway. He found Dean's room door ajar and heard a muffled exchange coming from inside. Worried Dean might be in trouble, he hurried toward the sound. Pushing gently, he saw Dean perched on the edge of the bed, phone pressed against his ear. His cane leaned against a bedside table. A tray with half-finished toast and orange juice sat forgotten at Dean's feet. At Jake's appearance, Dean flashed a sheepish smile and waved him in, mouthing that it was Janet on the line. Easing the door shut, Jake hovered by the dresser, not wanting to intrude. From the halting rhythm of Dean's words, the conversation seemed significant. "All right," Dean said quietly, rubbing the bandage around his temple. "If you're sure, yeah, of course I'm interested." A pause. "But only if you're comfortable with it. I don't want you feeling pressured." Another pause, and he nodded. "Okay, thanks for calling. Talk soon." He ended the call, sighing in a mix of disbelief and excitement. Jake crossed his arms. "Everything all right?" Dean drummed his fingers on the phone. "Janet wants me to come by again, but this time for a few days. Apparently she has a spare room. She says there's no point in me holed up here when she's got space. Plus she thinks it might help Maddie adjust if we're all under one roof, at least temporarily." A faint grin flickered. "She claims it's the best plan for everyone." Jake raised an eyebrow. "That's pretty generous. You sure you're up for living under the same roof as your savior dog?" He smirked gently, remembering how quickly the connection between Dean and Maddie had formed. "Feels surreal," Dean admitted. "But the motel's not exactly homey, and I have to admit I'm lonely. Maybe it's a chance to heal with the dog close by, though I don't want to disrupt Janet's life." Jake imagined Janet's modest house, the wide yard, the sense of calm that had lingered around her porch light. "I can drive you over if you decide to accept," he offered. "I'm not leaving town until I see you settled. Besides, I'm curious to watch this arrangement unfold." Dean nodded, fumbling for his cane. "Let's do it. I just need to settle the motel bill and gather my stuff. She said any time this morning would be fine, so let's not keep her waiting." He stood, wobbling only slightly, then took a breath as if bracing for a leap into uncharted territory. The tension in his brow told Jake how much this invitation meant, both an opportunity and a risk. While Dean finished packing, Jake ducked out to buy coffee at a nearby stand. The air smelled of cut grass and fresh pastry, and a few families bustled about with travel bags. He felt the day's energy, a sense of forward motion. Life around Greenleaf Lake had returned to normal for most, yet for Jake and Dean, normal had been permanently redefined. He returned, handing Dean a cup, and they loaded the sedan. Soon they were on the winding road back toward Janet's house, conversation easy and light. On arrival, Maddie's bark reverberated again through the open window. Janet emerged wearing a t-shirt and old jeans, hair in a loose ponytail. Her smile brightened immediately at the sight of Dean stepping carefully from the car. She offered her arm for balance, but he managed to walk unaided to the porch, waving away too much help. Maddie, meanwhile, bounded around them, tail wagging in vigorous circles that risked sweeping aside anything in her path. "Thank you for coming," Janet said, leading them inside. Jake noticed subtle changes in the living room decor. A spare blanket folded neatly on the couch, pillows propped in a corner. She must have been preparing for Dean's stay. "I made sure the guest room has fresh sheets, and I've moved breakables out of Maddie's reach. Not that she's destructive, but I'd rather be safe." Dean glanced at Jake, eyes brimming with gratitude. "You see how thoughtful she is? I feel like I'm imposing." Janet wagged a finger teasingly. "None of that. You're still recovering. It's good to have people around who understand what you've been through. And Maddie, well, she's had her own rough patch. Maybe you can both keep each other going." They ventured down a short hallway to the guest bedroom, a modest space with a soft rug, a single bed, and a small desk by the window. Light filtered through sheer curtains, bathing the room in mellow warmth. Maddie patted in, nose exploring every corner as if giving her personal seal of approval. Jake marveled at how natural it felt, watching the dog circle Dean, tail wagging in a quiet dance of acceptance. "I'm around if you need me," Janet said, resting her hands on her hips. "Don't feel shy about asking for help, especially if your head hurts again." Her gaze lingered on Dean's bandage, concern etched in her features. He nodded appreciatively, placing his bag on the bed. Jake, leaning against the doorframe, smiled. "I can stay a while, help you settle in, or I can head back to town. Whatever you prefer, man." Dean hesitated, clearly torn, but eventually he said, "I think I'm good. We'll text you if we need anything. And, thanks for everything, Jake." His voice quivered momentarily. "I owe you more than I can ever pay back." Jake patted his friend's shoulder. "You'd do the same for me. Take care of yourself, okay?" Then, turning to Janet, he added, "Call if anything comes up. I won't be far." That settled, Jake left them to acclimate and started the drive back toward the motel. A swirl of conflicting emotions pressed at him. Relief that Dean had found a secure place to recover. A hint of envy that Dean and Maddie would spend hours together, forging their bond under the same roof. And underlying it all, a quiet satisfaction, the sense that after all the turmoil, everyone was finally where they needed to be. He spent the afternoon strolling around town, browsing a local bookstore, grabbing lunch at the diner where he and Dean had eaten the day before. Time passed peacefully, yet by evening, curiosity tugged at him. Were they settling in all right? Was the dog nervous, or did she slip easily into routine? He forced himself to hold back from calling, deciding they needed space to navigate this new arrangement without his interference. Meanwhile, at Janet's house, Dean reclined on the living room couch, eyes closed, a light headache throbbing in his skull. Maddie lay sprawled at his feet, chin resting on her paws as though reading his mood. Janet sat in an armchair, glancing between them. "Want more tea?" she asked softly. He shook his head with a small smile, content to simply be. Soft music played in the background, the atmosphere warm and unhurried. At some point, Dean decided to step outside, cane in hand, to see the yard. Janet walked beside him across the porch, down a few wooden steps and onto a narrow path that circled the garden. Maddie bounded ahead, sniffing shrubs and patrolling the fence line. The day's fading light cast a golden glow on the grass, reminding Dean once again of the dog's coat in that fateful ravine. He paused beneath the tall oak, swaying slightly. Janet silently offered an arm, and he accepted for balance. "How does it feel?" she asked, gazing around at the small orchard and trickling creek. He inhaled, letting the mild scent of moss and damp soil fill him. "Good. Peaceful." A short laugh escaped. "I can't believe how quickly life can change." Janet nodded, gazing fondly at Maddie. "I used to think I understood this place well, but losing her taught me everything could be upended in a heartbeat." Her voice wavered. "I never thought she'd come back, or that she'd bring someone else along." They walked slowly to the creek's edge. A makeshift bench stood under a willow tree, and they sat. Maddie soon joined, trotting over with an inquisitive look. Her eyes roamed from Dean to Janet, as if verifying both were safe and content. Dean stroked her neck. "You saved me. I just wish I knew how to repay you." The dog offered a quiet huff, as though dismissing the notion of repayment, and pressed closer to him. Their first evening as housemates passed in gentle conversation. Janet heated soup for dinner, insisting Dean stay off his feet. He ate, then took the doctor's prescribed medication before stretching out on the couch. Maddie curled up on a rug, occasionally nudging Dean's foot with her muzzle. A sense of belonging settled over them, fragile yet reassuring. It surprised Dean to see how seamlessly the dog shifted between them, leaning on Janet with tail wagging in gratitude, then returning to Dean's side as though mindful that he still needed comfort. Late that night, after the dishes were done and the lights lowered, Janet lingered by Dean's door, hugging her arms as though unsure about crossing any personal boundary. "If you need anything, just yell," she said softly. "Or text me. I'm usually a light sleeper." Dean thanked her, smiling, aware that this was all new territory for both of them. She left, and Maddie promptly hopped up, settling at the foot of his bed, unasked, but unmistakably welcome. Dean allowed himself a moment to marvel at the closeness. Outside, the wind rustled the trees. Inside, the dog's gentle breathing lulled him into a calm he hadn't felt in years. Healing was slow, but he sensed that his heart was beginning to mend in ways unrelated to the battered skull. Here, in this quiet home, he was forging a bond not just with the dog, but with a life he had never dared imagine. For now, that was all he needed. Over the next several days, Dean discovered how profoundly sharing a home with Maddie and Janet began to reshape his daily routines. He woke each morning to gentle rays of sunlight spilling through the guest room window, with Maddie curled at his feet as if standing perpetual guard. Though his head still ached and occasional bouts of dizziness forced him to move slowly, he felt a renewed sense of purpose simply by observing the dog's unwavering devotion. She would trot behind him down the hallway, nudge her head under his hand to offer support, and watch intently whenever he paused to steady himself. Janet, meanwhile, bustled around the kitchen, brewing coffee or steeping herbal teas meant to soothe aches and aid healing. They soon fell into a rhythm that felt surprisingly natural. At breakfast, Dean would help Janet crack eggs into a bowl, stirring them gently while Maddie danced beside them, nose in the air to catch every savory scent. Sometimes the dog would let out an excited bark as though reminding them of the time she scavenged for scraps in the wild. They laughed every time, sharing a memory that was no longer purely traumatic, but now tinged with gratitude. After clearing the dishes, Janet would head to her home office, where she worked remotely as a graphic designer. Dean would rest on the couch or sit by the window, reading novels Jake had dropped off, comforted by the soft presence of Maddie's chin resting on his knee. In the afternoons, if Dean felt strong enough, They ventured into the backyard. The sun was warmer now, late spring breezes replacing the chill of early morning. Maddie relished those moments, bounding through tall grass, her coat catching the golden light in mesmerizing swirls. Often, Janet joined them, offering an arm to Dean when he traversed uneven ground. Their conversation flowed easily, from reminiscing about lost childhood pets to discussing new recipes. Despite the underlying awareness that Maddie's rightful home was here, and Dean was merely a temporary guest, neither could deny the house was more alive than ever. Jake visited on the third day, bringing fresh groceries and a few supplies for Dean. Standing on the porch, he found Maddie wiggling with delight at his arrival, an old chew toy clasped in her jaws as if begging him to play. Dean opened the door in comfortable sweats, looking far more alert than before, though still leaning on his cane. Janet welcomed Jake with a bright smile, inviting him to stay for lunch. They gathered around a small dining table near the window, which overlooked a patch of wildflowers. While Maddie lounged underfoot, Dean and Jake traded updates. The ranger station had requested an official statement from Dean about that night, and Jake mentioned that the camper he'd left by the lake was now fully retrieved with no damages. The two men locked eyes, recalling how a single dog's plea had changed their fates. Over bowls of homemade vegetable soup, talk shifted to the near future. Janet admitted she was torn about making any abrupt decisions regarding Maddie. The dog's reaction to Dean's presence was unwaveringly affectionate, and Dean lit up around her in a way that Janet found both heartwarming and slightly bittersweet. "She's family," Janet said, stirring her spoon carefully. "But I can't deny there's something special between them. So I was thinking, maybe we can share some sort of arrangement. If Dean finds a place nearby or visits on weekends." Dean's face betrayed a flicker of hope, though he tried not to appear too eager. "I'd love that," he confessed. "Before all this, I never pictured myself living anywhere but my cramped apartment in the city. Now, I catch myself wondering what it would be like to stay close to this town, close to Maddie," his voice softened, "and to the people who saved me." Jake glanced between them, a knowing glint in his eyes. He sensed that both Dean and Janet were contemplating more than just an arrangement for dog visits. There was a tenderness unspoken, a budding closeness that might or might not bloom into something deeper. Watching them exchange shy smiles, he felt sure that, no matter what path they chose, Maddie's role in uniting them was already significant beyond measure. When Jake left that afternoon, he promised to check in soon, though he sensed Dean was well on the road to recovery. Janet walked him out, leaning against the porch railing as the sky stretched wide and blue overhead. "It's been quite a whirlwind," she mused, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "I just hope Dean knows he isn't imposing." "I think you've made that pretty clear," Jake answered gently. "Take care of each other, okay?" With a wave, he headed to his car, leaving Janet to watch his taillights fade down the quiet road. She returned inside, where she found Dean in the living room, absent-mindedly stroking Maddie's fur. His eyes flicked up and she gave him a soft smile, one that carried more warmth than any casual roommate might offer. Late that night, Dean couldn't sleep, a dull throb in his temple reminding him of the trauma that first brought him here. He sat up in bed, the room illuminated by a slice of moonlight. Within seconds, Maddie sensed his restlessness and hopped onto the mattress beside him, resting her head on his thigh. The weight of her chin offered an unexpected comfort, an almost tangible reminder that he didn't have to face his lingering fears alone. Looking down at her trusting gaze, he whispered, "Thank you," fully aware she could not respond with words. Yet her tail's gentle thump spoke volumes. Gradually, new habits took root. Janet would drive Dean to his follow-up medical appointments, waiting patiently in the lobby while he underwent scans and evaluations. On one occasion, After a particularly thorough test, the doctor pronounced his concussion much improved. They recommended continued caution but assured him no permanent damage was evident. This encouraging news elated both Dean and Janet. Maddie, sensing their relieved energy, pranced around the living room that evening, spinning in circles before collapsing in a comical heap of golden fur. Even small chores became shared adventures. One afternoon, Dean insisted on mowing part of the lawn, determined to prove he wasn't a complete invalid. Janet hovered nearby, worried about his balance, but he managed the task with surprising steadiness. Maddie trotted around him, occasionally flopping onto the grass as if to supervise. By the time he finished, Dean was drenched in sweat and panting, yet beaming with pride. Janet brought him a cold drink, their hands brushing as he took the glass. "You're crazy," she murmured fondly, though her smile never wavered. Days melted into a soft progression of comfort and warmth. The house that once felt too big and empty for Janet was now brimming with daily routines. Shopping lists pinned to the fridge, dog toys scattered on the rug, half-read books piled in corners. At night, the three would gather to watch old movies or simply talk. Janet and Dean shared personal stories, from childhood memories to heartbreaks that shaped them. Maddie listened with mild curiosity, occasionally dozing off with her muzzle on someone's foot. A sense of belonging settled over them, so natural it was hard to recall how precarious life had been mere weeks before. One evening, Jake stopped by without warning, carrying a handful of mail he'd picked up at the motel for Dean. He found the door ajar and heard laughter floating from the backyard. Approaching quietly, he spotted Dean and Janet at the creek, their backs against the willow tree. Maddie played in the shallow water, splashing happily while chasing leaves that drifted by. The gentle hush of the current provided a serene backdrop for the warm banter between the two. Jake cleared his throat, and they both looked up with smiles. "I come bearing letters," he teased, waving envelopes in the air. "Mostly junk, but there's a few that look official." Dean thanked him, pushing off the tree trunk to walk back up the slope. Janet followed, wiping her hands on her jeans. Maddie dashed from the creek, shaking vigorously, spraying droplets across their legs. Instead of annoyance, both Dean and Janet burst into laughter, an easy camaraderie that Jake noted with satisfaction. They sat around a small patio table, sifting through mail. One envelope held the final statement from Dean's insurance confirming coverage for the hospital stay. Another carried a short note from the ranger station, officially thanking him for providing a thorough account of his accident and the dog's role in rescuing him. Dean reread that letter, fingers lightly tracing the words. "Guess it's all behind me now," he said softly, then glanced at Maddie. "Well, maybe not behind me, maybe it's part of me now." Jake listened as they discussed the possibility of Dean staying local. There were small rental cottages not far from Janet's place. If he chose to put down roots here, it might open the door for a shared arrangement, giving Maddie the best of both worlds. Janet avoided pressuring him, but her occasional side glances betrayed a certain hope. Dean, meanwhile, tread carefully, acknowledging that a fleeting crisis bond did not automatically guarantee a seamless future. Still, the spark was there, undeniable. When twilight finally descended, they said their goodnights. Jake returned to his car, leaving behind a warm circle of porch light that framed Dean and Janet, with Maddie sprawled contentedly at their feet. Looking back one last time, Jake felt that familiar rush of amazement at how one selfless animal could alter so many lives. He recalled the silent, urgent bark by the lake that had steered him through the darkness. Now the outcome shone like a beacon of connection, bridging solitude with companionship. Driving away, Jake mused on how different their lives might look a year from now. Perhaps Dean would be running with Maddie through that yard. No cane needed. Perhaps Janet would expand her home business, supported by these two calm, protective presences. Perhaps, he thought with a slight grin, he would visit them regularly, just to see what new joys or small adventures had unfolded. In the rearview mirror, the gentle glow of that house soon vanished, replaced by the hush of the rural road. Yet the sense of something precious lingered, a testament to the unexpected gifts that arise when a dog in need leads you to a stranger in peril, forging bonds that transform hearts forever. Over the next few weeks, life in Janet's home found its own gentle pace as Dean's recovery approached its final stage. Gone were the days when he needed to lean on a cane with every cautious step. His head still throbbed faintly if he overexerted himself, but those pangs were fewer, and each morning brought clearer focus. Janet, with her steady supply of patience and kind-hearted humor, had coaxed him into a simple daily routine: warm tea at sunrise, light stretching to rebuild his stamina. Then, the reward of quiet companionship with Maddie, who never ceased to amaze them both with her soulful sensitivity. Sometimes they ambled out to the creek behind the house. Dean discovered a kind of meditation in watching the water drift over stones, while Maddie bounded around the banks chasing frogs. Janet would perch on a large rock, sketching the scene for her design practice. At first, Dean struggled with a pang of guilt. He was living under her roof without contributing much, so he found small ways to help, washing dishes or preparing lunch. Whenever he apologized for needing extra rest, Janet just waved him off, reminding him that generosity meant sharing both burdens and joys. He found himself grateful in a way he had never known, basking in a sense of belonging that made each day feel quietly special. Jake remained a frequent visitor, often arriving on a Saturday with groceries or DVDs for them to watch in the evenings. When Dean mentioned he wanted to repay some of the kindness he'd received, Jake merely grinned. "You already did, man. Seeing you up and about is all the reward I need." Over time, their bond deepened until it felt like they'd known each other for years. Once or twice, Jake brought out a foldable chair so they could sit in the yard at dusk, spinning hopeful plans about a future where Maddie was free to shuttle between Janet's warm house and any potential new home Dean might find in town. Janet silently observed these discussions, a soft contentment lighting her face. In quieter moments, she admitted to Dean that she'd never planned on having a housemate. She had spent her adult life guarding her independence, especially since her parents' passing, but somehow this arrangement felt right. "You helped me realize," she confessed one day, "that walls aren't always meant to keep people out. Sometimes they keep us from letting the right ones in." A blush tinted her cheeks, but Dean merely squeezed her hand, understanding perfectly. Maddie watched it all with a serene acceptance. She was no longer the stray dog surviving by wits alone. Instead, she had grown used to morning cuddles and evening romps in the yard. She split her affection seamlessly, curling next to Dean whenever his old fears of darkness returned, and then following Janet around while she worked, as though ensuring neither was ever lonely. For the golden retriever who once risked everything to find help for a fallen hiker, this new life was the sweetest reward. As Dean's final medical checkup neared, both he and Janet grappled with the question that hovered in the background: how long would he stay? The idea of returning to his cramped city apartment felt hollow. He had no strong ties there, no job that couldn't be done remotely if he adjusted his plans. Even so, he hesitated to assume he should remain in the house indefinitely. He mentioned searching for a nearby rental, hinting he might be a better neighbor than a permanent guest. Yet each time, Janet's smile lost a fraction of its glow, and Maddie's wagging tail drooped slightly. Something in their dynamic suggested this tenuous arrangement had grown into an emotional anchor for all three. The day before his checkup, Dean stood in the kitchen absent-mindedly polishing a mug while Janet rummaged in a cupboard for spices. "Tomorrow's the big day," she said, trying to sound cheerful. "No more bandages, right? Your doctor sounded pretty optimistic." Her voice carried hope, yet a subtle undercurrent of tension remained. If the doctor declared Dean fully healed, Did that mean his next move was imminent? Dean set down the mug, glancing at Maddie dozing by the doorway. "Yeah, I'm almost back to normal," he said, then paused. I'm not sure I want to rush off. This place feels like home." With that admission, he faltered, uncertain if he had crossed a line. Janet shut the cupboard door and turned, kindness in her gaze. "It is home. You're welcome here, you know. But I also don't want you to feel stuck or indebted." She brushed flour from her palms. "I was thinking, you could look for a small place in town, something that suits you, and if it's close by, well, I'd hope you'd still visit often. Or more than visit, if that's what we want." They were both aware of the unspoken potential for something deeper than friendship. Yet neither rushed it, allowing unhurried days to guide them. A bashful warmth filled the kitchen. Dean opened his mouth to respond, but a knock at the front door stopped him. Janet moved to answer, revealing Jake standing on the porch with an uncharacteristic air of excitement. "You two busy?" he asked, strolling in without waiting for a reply. "Because I've got news." He pointed to an envelope under his arm. "Remember I was bugging the local property office for listings? Well, they emailed me about a little cottage that's just come on the market near the nature trails. Thought maybe Dean would like to see the pictures." He handed over the envelope with a grin. "Looks perfect for someone who wants a quiet yard and a short drive to, let's say, a friend's house with a dog." Dean's eyes lit up as he flipped through the printed photos. The cottage was modest, with a small porch and a fenced backyard backing onto a wooded area. The price seemed reasonable, especially if he considered a partial remote work arrangement. Janet tried to contain her reaction, but the relief on her face was obvious. "It looks really nice," she said softly. Maddie pawed at Dean's leg as if seconding the notion of a place where she could chase squirrels whenever she visited. Jake watched them, a spark of mischief in his expression. "So, maybe after that final checkup, we can all drive over and see it in person. I figure no harm in giving it a look." He winked and Janet's cheeks warmed. "Sure," Dean replied, smiling. "Count me in." He set the photos aside, acknowledging that this moment could define his future. He liked the idea of remaining close to both his newfound friends and the dog that rescued him. Truth be told, the thought of forging a new life in a quiet corner of the countryside felt more appealing every day. That evening, they sat on the back porch while the sun sank in fiery splendor behind the creek. Crickets began their nocturnal chorus, and a soft breeze rustled the branches overhead. Janet brought out lemonade, and they sipped it in companionable silence. Maddie dozed under the porch rail, lulled by the hush of twilight. Jake sprawled in a wicker chair, occasionally teasing them about future housewarming parties. "Just imagine," he joked, Dean hosting backyard barbecues, Maddie patrolling for scraps, Janet adding personal design touches, maybe a hammock or two strung between pines. His tone was light, but the corners of his mouth twitched with genuine joy. "I'll crash on the couch whenever I'm passing through, of course," Dean chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. "I might actually like that. Way better than city noise." Janet's gaze flicked toward him, her eyes reflecting the last sliver of daylight. "It suits you," she said softly. "This pace of life, I mean. I used to think it was lonely out here, but Maddie changed that. And then you came along." She hesitated, then let out a gentle laugh. "And ironically, I have a rescue dog to thank for saving not just you, but maybe me too." Later, when Jake headed home, leaving the pair in the deepening dusk, Dean and Janet lingered by the porch steps, the air thick with the promise of a new chapter. Maddie hopped up, pressing her cold nose against Dean's hand. He leaned against the wooden railing, exhaling contentedly. "Tomorrow might bring big news from the doctor, but I already feel cured," he remarked quietly. Janet slid an arm around his waist without overthinking the gesture. Together they watched fireflies dance among the tall grass, their tiny lights flickering like beacons of hope. By the time they turned in for the night, Dean's thoughts were full of possibility. The fear of returning to an empty apartment had receded, replaced by dreams of building a life near the people and dog who had become his lifeline. He wondered if Janet felt the same comfort in these quiet hours, her mind drifting to a shared future beyond mere kindness. Gazing at Maddie curled beside his bed, he whispered, "We'll figure it out, girl," and let the hush of the countryside carry him into peaceful sleep, trusting that morning would answer his unspoken prayers. Morning arrived with pastel ribbons of light stretching across the horizon, coaxing Dean from a dreamless sleep. He carefully pulled back the blanket and found Maddie blinking up at him, her muzzle nudging his leg. Today was significant, the day of his final checkup, and perhaps the beginning of a new page. Janet had already crept out to the kitchen, the faint clatter of dishes drifting down the hall. He inhaled the comforting aroma of coffee mingled with the crisp smell of morning dew that wafted in through the open window. A tingle of anticipation fluttered in his chest. Perfect. He rose, carefully testing his balance, then gently patted Maddie's head. Despite occasional echoes of dizziness, he felt sturdier than ever. Stepping into the hallway, he found Janet at the counter, pouring steaming coffee into 2 mugs. She glanced over her shoulder, smiling softly. "Good morning," she murmured, sliding 1 mug toward him. "Ready for your big day?" Her eyes shone with a hopeful light, though apprehension lingered. Dean nodded, picking up the mug and inhaling the rich aroma. "I think so," he said. "Doctor visits don't scare me anymore. Just hope I'm truly ready for what comes next." Indeed. Breakfast was a quick affair. Toast, scrambled eggs, and fruit, since they wanted to arrive at the clinic early. Maddie trailed them, nose twitching inquisitively whenever they paused. Once the dishes were rinsed, Janet grabbed her keys, and Dean patted his pocket for the paperwork. Outside, the sky was pristine, a soft azure dotted with faint cottony clouds. He opened the passenger door, pausing as Maddie gazed at him with somber eyes, head cocked. "Wish me luck," he whispered, reaching to scratch behind her ear. She thumped her tail in response, conveying that steady, calming assurance he loved. Janet beckoned. They departed. The drive took half an hour, winding through narrow roads lined by wildflowers and tall grasses. Neither spoke much, but the silence was companionable. Janet parked in the clinic's lot, and Dean took a calming breath. Inside, the waiting room smelled of disinfectant and faint coffee, with subdued chatter drifting from behind drawn curtains. A nurse soon called his name, leading him to an exam room for final tests. Janet squeezed his hand at the threshold, whispering encouragement. He managed a small grin, stepping forward to face the last hurdle. His pulse pounded with cautious optimism, ready to embrace freedom. An hour later, Dean emerged from the exam room with fresh bandages removed, plus a clean bill of health. The doctor had cautioned him not to overdo strenuous activities, but declared his concussion nearly healed. Janet rose from her seat, relief shining in her gaze. "That's wonderful," she murmured. Dean exhaled, as though shedding the final weight of fear. "I can't believe it," he admitted. "Feels like ages since that night." The two walked out side by side, hearts buoyed by the promise of new beginnings. Outside, sunlight warmed their faces, and they headed toward Janet's car, feeling every step. They contacted Jake, who agreed to meet at the little cottage for a viewing. The place sat only 10 minutes away from the clinic, tucked amid a grove of young aspens that whispered in the breeze. Janet parked behind Jake's vehicle, stepping out to find him leaning on a fence post, scanning the surroundings with an approving smile. "Took a peek inside," he announced. "Cozy as can be. Think you'll like it, Dean." Together they ascended a short path to the front porch, excitement mingling with apprehension. A realtor's lockbox secured the door, but Jake had retrieved a key earlier. Inside, the cottage revealed a single bedroom, a compact living area, and a simple kitchen bathed in soft afternoon light. The hardwood floors bore a few scratches, adding character rather than detracting from its warmth. Through a back door, they discovered a fenced yard abutting a narrow creek, echoing the environment at Janet's place. Dean stood there, imagining Maddie bounding around with her squeaky toys. Janet traced a fingertip along the windowsill, smiling. "This could be it," she murmured, glancing at Dean. He nodded, speechless at how easily he could envision calling it home. Jake flashed a thumbs up, feeling triumphant. They lingered another half hour, discussing minor repairs and paint choices. Dean gravitated toward the living room, glancing at a nook where a small couch might fit perfectly. Janet noticed details he missed, like the sturdy windows that would let in sunlight for houseplants and the wide sill where Maddie might prop her chin to watch birds. Jake hovered in the background, letting them dream aloud. Finally, Dean exhaled, turning to face Janet. "I think this is the place," he said, voice trembling. "Assuming you don't mind me being so close by." Her cheeks glowed and she gave him a nudge. That evening they returned to Janet's house, brimming with plans and possibilities. Maddie met them at the door, tail whacking the wall in exuberant greeting. Over dinner, Dean recounted each corner of the cottage and Janet added humorous commentary about paint colors. He caught her eye across the table, heart pounding in recognition of how far they had come. Afterward, Maddie curled at their feet as they discussed the timeline for Dean's move. Uncertainty lingered, but the mood hummed with promise. Before bed, Dean slipped out to the porch, gazing at stars while Maddie leaned against his legs, sharing hope. Within a week, Dean made an offer on the cottage. Though it required some paperwork and negotiation, the process flowed smoothly, buoyed by the memory of everything he'd overcome. On the day he signed the contract, Janet surprised him with a small keychain shaped like a paw print. Maddie trotted around them, as though sensing this milestone marked a new dawn in all their lives. Jake appeared with a grin, clapping Dean on the shoulder. "Told you things would work out," he said, voice gentle. They embraced in rare camaraderie, then stepped forward into the next chapter, hearts bursting wide. Moving day arrived, bathed in golden sunlight. Janet and Dean stood amid boxes stacked beside the trunk of her car, while Maddie darted back and forth, ears perked in excitement. Jake pulled up, hauling supplies in his van, joking about how a rescue dog turned us all into moving crew. Inside the cottage, they arranged furniture, hammered nails for pictures, and tested the faucet's water pressure. By midday, laughter echoed through every room. Maddie sniffed corners, tail waving like a banner, as though claiming it for all of them. Change felt lighter than ever, edged with sweet anticipation. Everything glowed. That evening, they gathered on Dean's newly acquired porch, a soft lantern casting warm light across the makeshift table where pizza boxes stood open. Maddie curled under the table, expecting crusts from friendly hands. Janet clinked her soda can against Dean's, congratulating him on reclaiming his independence. Jake raised his own toast, teasing them about how long it would be before wedding bells chimed. Dean and Janet exchanged an amused look, cheeks flushing, but the undercurrent of possibility thrummed. Above, stars blinked, and the creek whispered beyond the fence. Hope tugged at every heart, forging deeper bonds and radiant dreams. When the last slice disappeared, Janet brought out a small cake studded with strawberries. They cut generous pieces, sharing sugary bites that tasted of pure celebration. Maddie swished her tail in gentle approval, receiving a special dog-friendly treat from Dean's hand. Laughter mingled with the evening breeze, carrying away echoes of old fears. From the ravine where it all began, to this cozy porch, they'd traveled a winding path. Yet one truth shone through: love can be found in the most unexpected places. Dean caught Janet's eye, quietly marveling at how a single dog's loyal heart brought them home together.